Shalom and welcome to the Heartland Connection. This is Zach Waller, the Executive Director of Hayovel, your host, coming to you guys straight from the Heartland of Israel. Harvest is in full swing. We are having an amazing time here in the mountains of Israel, bringing in the harvest. It's such a festive season. We're singing and just acknowledging the provision that God has made here in the land of Israel, and there's something really special about touching, feeling like holding these sacred fruit that the prophets only dreamed about. I mean, it's just an incredible thing with the normal harvest. You know, even when we were back in Tennessee farming, like the harvest time is just the joyous time, the time when you're reaping the benefits of all the work you've put in up until then of planting and cultivating and growing and watering and all these things. And then the harvest is here, and it's just such a time of joy. So we're in that season here in the land of Israel. The harvest is in full gear. We are just actually wrapped up our first harvest trip. The 2-week group just finished up. And we've welcomed in the 3-weekers by the time you guys are listening to this podcast. Every time we finish up with the group, we're sending them out as ambassadors back to their home countries. We go through all of the things that was accomplished and all the places and people they were able to connect with. And it's such an awesome thing. And it really just hits me every time, because it's like, this task of picking grapes, it's such a menial thing. It's such a simple thing. There's nothing really complicated about it. It's so simple. And in some ways, people just are kind of bewildered by that. Like how are you getting people to pay to come and work in the vineyards of Israel? That just doesn't make a whole lot of sense. Why would somebody pay to go and do that? But I think there's just so much more to it. And I actually I've written this thing up called Just Picking Grapes. And I just, as I was writing it down, I was like, wow, there's so much that happens. There's so much that God is bringing about through this very, very simple task. I mean, in just 2 weeks, this 2-week trip that just came in, we harvested over 55 tons of grapes in just 2 weeks, which that's putting in a total of 1,360 man-hours. And these guys went all over Judea and Samaria, connected to the land of Israel through either touring or working the land. And we were in Elon Moreh, in Itamar, in Shiloh, in Jerusalem, which included going up on Har HaBayit, up on the Temple Mount. It was a very, very special trip there. Breaking Israel News actually just put out an article about it. You could check that out. We were able to go to the Temple Institute and to Yad Vashem, and also get a tour in the Knesset. We also went to Kochav HaShachar, one of the first communities here in Samaria. Went to Hebron, to Pnei Hever, a community just not too far from Hebron, where there's a really cool chocolate factory, one of the volunteers' favorite spots. We went to Beit El, or Bethel, to Psagot, to Tura Winery in Rechelim, and of course here in this area on Har Bracha. And just connected. So, I mean, these guys are like seriously connected to the land and also connected to the people. We heard from so many Israelis, the farmers that were serving, different rabbis that came up here to speak to us, our tour guides, lectures. We've actually had lectures from the government of Israel has recognized Hayovel as a legitimate thing that's bringing in people from the nations, and they want these people to go back as educated ambassadors. So the government of Israel is paying for lectures to come out and teach our volunteers. And of course, our heroes, the brave Jewish settlers that are right here living in Judea and Samaria and giving their lives for this cause. Our volunteers are able to connect to these people. And so through this, menial, simple task, a seemingly simple task of picking grapes on the mountains of Samaria, our volunteers are able to seriously connect to the Bible, to actually partner with God in bringing glory and honor to his name by physically fulfilling his word, these 3,000-year-old prophecies that are taking place right now. And they've like I was saying, they've given much needed support to these valiant Jewish families that God has raised up and placed here as a sign for the world, that the world can see that God's word is true, and that this time of redemption, this time of restoration is here. And through that support of these Jewish people, these people here, we're seeing the depths of 2,000-year-old wounds begin to be healed. It doesn't take much studying and much research into history to see that it's been really, really bad, horrific history that's happened. And so to be able to come in and just humbly bless and serve the Jewish people, we're seeing some really, really incredible things happen. And it's all prophesied. It talks about nations coming in and being a part of this redemption process. And so our volunteers are really connecting, forever connecting. They're just totally changed when they go back. They're connecting to the heartland of Israel. Their hands are holding the sacred fruit that the holy prophets only dreamed about. Their faith is actually being, made sight. It's like they're actually seeing the word of God come to pass. They're actually reading the Bible and then seeing these places where it actually happened. And they've connected not only to the past, but to God's supernatural plan of redemption. It's going to be here in Israel, in Zion, and not only what's going to come to pass, but these steps that we're seeing right now is like the beginning of this miraculous process, and they're taking part in that. And it's just it's so huge that God has invited each of these volunteers here to His land and has given them these special experiences, this treasure chest of experiences, to be educated as ambassadors for the Heartland of Israel, to go out to their home countries and share all that they've experienced. And again, all this is through this really seemingly simple, menial task of just picking grapes, through humbly loving and serving God's chosen people. And it's just so simple, but so huge. It's so incredible, and sometimes even hard to even put into words like exactly how big it is. But it's a really huge thing, and something that I think it's gonna have a huge impact all over the world, and is having a huge impact. And so it's an amazing thing to be a part of, and to see that it's actually happening. It's really happening right now in our times. And speaking of that experience here in the land, we actually just did a new video that I encourage you guys to go check out. It's submitted to a contest, actually, on the Israel Video Network. So if you go to israelvideonetwork.com, and then up at the top in the menu bar, it says Inspired by Israel contest gallery. So you click on that, and it's actually like a thing where you vote. So if you guys can go in there and watch the video, and then if you think it's awesome, vote for it. They're actually giving away a $8,000 cash prize for the winner. So if you guys can help us get in there and win the contest, it'll give us that much more money to put back into making more awesome videos that support Israel and to continue the work that we're doing here in the land. So it'd be great if you guys go check that out. And the video is kind of along the same lines of like trying to take in these very ordinary things that are happening. Vineyards being planted, buildings being built, like all these things that are happening here in Israel are very ordinary things, but because they're here and because they haven't been here for the last 2,000 years, they're very ordinary things that are very extraordinary because they're taking place here in the land of Israel at this time all at once. Like it's all of a sudden just boom. I like to say God has flipped the restoration switch and the land of Israel is being restored. So it is truly an amazing time to be alive and to witness these things that are happening here in the land of Israel. The Torah portion this week is Shoftim. We're in Deuteronomy chapter 16, verse 18 through chapter 21, verse 9. And that word Shoftim means judges. And so this Torah portion is kicked off talking about establishing judges and officers, basically like what we would think of as a judge, and then basically like police, people who make sure that order and law is maintained, upheld. So it's really interesting that these things are actually commanded right here in the scriptures. I think, in our world today, unfortunately, in believing circles, a lot of times leadership and any kind of authority is really not respected or looked down upon or run away from. But we see in this Torah portion that this is something that God said, this is something that you need. You need somebody who can make decisions, who can be the judge, who can be law keepers, and this is the way that a community should function. So it's really interesting. I've talked about this a little bit in past podcasts, but it's a very fascinating subject. I won't take time today to jump into it too much. Next, we have this capital punishment is being introduced here, like when this is applicable. We have capital punishment for idol worship. And it's really interesting here, too, talking about leadership. Like in this next section, we have capital punishment being given as the punishment for not following the Sanhedrin. So if you have a judge who goes against the rules from Jerusalem, right, from the Cohen and the leadership that God's put in place, there's actually a death penalty for not following the leadership. I mean, talking about serious, like, okay, of course people are going to have different ideas, but when it comes down to it, this body of leaders decides, and everybody has to follow it, or the penalty is death. Like, this is serious stuff. Then the Torah portion goes into rules for the king. Has to write a Torah scroll, 2 Torah scrolls, has to not take in too much money, too many horses, too many wives. I got some basic rules here. Then we talk about the tithes for the Kohen. They go to the priest, the Kohanim. And then we have the cities of refuge. And that's actually what I want to jump into a little bit deeper here. When I read this, I was like, man, didn't we just read about this? And I look back, and like in Deuteronomy chapter 4, we also read a little bit about this. And then there's a lot more information about the cities of refuge in Numbers chapter 35. So first glance over this thing, it's a pretty interesting subject, right? You're reading this and you're going, okay, I do not relate to a lot of what's going on here. Sounds kind of cool. Sounds kind of maybe old-fashioned. Sounds kind of like something that's really not relevant for today. And maybe that's why I always like a good challenge. So when I see something like that in the scripture, I'm like, okay, I know scripture is relevant for me today, so I need to really dig into this and find out what it is. So, all right, so these things that are hard to relate to are that we have an incident here where somebody dies in an accident, right? It's not intentional, it's an accident. And the person that's responsible for that accident runs for his life to the city of refuge. And here's where things start getting a little seemingly irrelevant for us, like a little strange, like not very applicable. Someone killed someone on accident, and then the relative of the dead person is going to run in with a sword and take this guy out who just killed his relative. And considering that this is all the people of Israel, the guy who's running after the guy to kill him is actually related to, depending, who knows exactly how far back, but these guys are all related, right? So this is where we have a little bit of difficulty relating to this, right? Because we don't really have avengers of blood, in our day, we it's taken to the court system or whatever. But this person almost sounds kind of tribal. I think of like a Nate Saint, in the jungles down South America, where all of a sudden there's these tribes that going out, and if somebody kills somebody from another tribe, another guy runs after him and kills him, and it's just back and forth bloodshed all the time. And it's like it almost puts you in that kind of mindset, like this is some kind of jungle tribal thing going on here. What in the world is this thing all about? So one thing I want to point out right off the bat is that back in Numbers chapter 35 and verse 30, it says, "Whoever kills a person, the murderer shall be put to death on the testimony of witnesses. But one witness is not sufficient testimony against a person for the death penalty." So we see right off the bat here, okay, there's a little bit more details, a little bit more of a process going on here than just, oh, that man killed my near kin, I'm going to be the avenger of blood, I'm going to go take him out. Actually, there had to be witnesses, there had to be some sort of judge, there had to be some sort of process that these guys went through in order to decide, okay, yes, this person is has committed this crime and we should administer the death penalty, capital punishment. So that kind of put me a little bit of rest right there. I was like, okay, so there is some formalities here that they have to be gone through. There is some sort of process of going to a court. It's not just wild, people going around killing each other. There has to be witnesses. Then Then I also went to Aleph Beta. I really enjoy Rabbi David Foreman's thoughts on the Torah portion, and he got some really great videos and thoughts there. And he brought out something really interesting, pretty fascinating about like what the deeper meaning is behind all this stuff. And he was talking about how there's a concept of protection going on here, that and he parallels this whole idea of these cities of refuge with Cain and Abel. And there's a lot of different word connections, and there's different, Rabbi David Foreman's always making these different connections. But if you look at the story closely, you see that basically Cain did not protect his brother. Okay, this was the first death. It looks like, this might not have even been intentional, because Cain and Abel, they'd never seen a death before. They didn't know that people could die. They didn't know what was going on here. They were obviously not happy with each other, so there was a struggle going on, but most likely Cain didn't realize that if he killed Abel, that he would be like gone forever, never be able to talk to him or relate to him again. So in a way, it was kind of unintentional killing, a murder. But it was a murder, and we see that there's a very harsh punishment. But what's interesting is that God comes in and says, Cain, what's going on here, and where is Abel? And what does Cain say? He says, "Am I my brother's keeper?" And so Rabbi David Foreman really makes an interesting tie here, saying that Cain basically here is saying that he's not responsible for, or not somebody who's supposed to protect his brother. And then the punishment that God gives is really interesting too. God says he's going to punish him, and he's going to be a vagabond or whatever, but he says he's going to put this mark on you so that you're protected, because Cain's like, oh, this is more than I can bear. God says, I'm going to put this mark on you that will protect you, that nobody will touch you, nobody will harm you. You're going to be okay. And so he was relating that to the cities of refuge idea, right? It's like the city of refuge is supposed to be a place where somebody who unintentionally killed someone can go and be safe. And so God put this mark on Cain. It's kind of a similar idea, that he was going to be protected. So Rabbi David Foreman points out that here Cain did not protect his brother Abel, but God is punishing him with his punishment, but God is saying, I'm going to protect you, nobody's going to harm you. And so then Cain has to live with the fact that he did not protect his brother, but God is protecting him, and basically showing him the way to, in this punishment, in a way helping Cain correct himself and see that, I need to be my brother's keeper, I need to protect him just like God is protecting me. So I thought that was a really, really fascinating study, and it made me think, okay, so in what ways do we keep or protect our brothers in today's time? Are we protecting and keeping our brothers in today's time? How does this look for us today, especially as believers? Relationships can be very challenging. We have the story of Cain and Abel. Abel's offering was accepted, Cain's wasn't. He gets mad, he's upset, he's jealous, and then they have this relational challenge, and all of a sudden somebody dies. Like it gets that serious. And many times we don't understand each other. Maybe we're different personalities. Maybe I realize this with relationship with my brothers. My motivation for doing a certain thing, or the reason why I would do a certain thing, wasn't necessarily why they would do a certain thing. So they would do that thing, and I would think, they must have had this motivation, and I would judge them on that front. But the reality was wasn't that way at all. Their motivation for doing that thing was different, and therefore my judgment, or the way I saw it, was actually wrong. And so there's all these different dynamics that are going on, and many times, if we're the one who is offended, we feel like that the other person, or we know, or we think that someone is not protecting us, right? That they have kind of betrayed us, and they don't have our back, and so we're offended by that. And then we begin imagining all sorts of things that he's doing wrong, or that he's not, and so in turn we're not protecting him, and it just goes back for the many times. It's the words we speak. And this is kind of the basis for pretty much all conflicts, right? There's like these little thing that starts, and then all of a sudden it grows into this huge thing. It reminds me of a story that I heard a long time ago about the, I think it's called the Grasshopper War. And the story goes, there was these two Indian tribes, and they were very friendly towards one another. They traded with each other, did all kinds of good things. Together were very friendly. And then one day, one of the tribe's little boys crossed the territorial line and found a little grasshopper, and he began playing with it, a big, nice grasshopper. And then another boy came over and started playing with him. But then a couple boys from the other tribe came over and started singing. And then he saw the tribe and said, "Oh, that grasshopper, you found that on our side, on our territory, that should be mine." So they started squabbling a little bit. And pretty soon they started yelling things back and forth. And pretty soon they were like all out fist fighting. And then all of a sudden the squaws, right, their mothers come up and they're like, "Hey, you know, what's going on here?" And they see the one boy punching their son, so the mother jumps in to protect him, and they bumped in. And then all of a sudden there's the fight just continues to escalate and escalate. And then all of a sudden the men come back from a day's hunt, and they see their women all beat up by the other tribe, and so then they join in. There's this huge war, and a lot of bloodshed, and just awful things happen, all from, begin with this little grasshopper, right? So it just, obviously the moral of the story is that it's very small, insignificant things that don't really matter can kick off a huge conflict that can cause a lot of horrible things. And we can see that throughout history. These seemingly, you look back, you read some of this stuff, and you're just like, why? How in the world did that cause this huge war or this huge thing that happened? And so it's so crucial that we watch our words. So what do we do with that? How do we keep this thing from happening? Many people are familiar with the story about the feather pillow, right? There's the guy who said something bad about somebody, and the rumor gets all around town. And so then this counselor comes in and says, and he's like, and the guy's like, "Oh, I feel so bad. I ruined this guy's reputation. What do I do?" And so the guy tells him to go get a pillow, rip it open. The feathers go everywhere. And then the counselor says, "Okay, so go and gather up all those feathers from the pillow." And obviously the guy's like, "Oh, that's impossible." And so he said, "Well, in the same way, your words are impossible to go and gather back in. There's no way that you could ever pull all those things back in. It's gone. Your word has been spoken, and poof, it's gone out. There's no way to build it back up." So we have to be super, super careful. We have to recognize that we actually are our brother's keeper. We have to protect one another even when we don't feel like it, right? There's a lot of times where that offense is so deep in our hearts that, and we hold that grudge, that we just don't feel like protecting our brother. We don't feel like, giving it whatever. If it's because of the jealousy, like Cain and Abel, it's because, we're just unable to give our brother the benefit of the doubt. Or maybe it's a prideful thing where we're trying to put our brother down because we're trying to make ourselves greater. Whatever it is, we have to realize that we are our brother's keeper. We have to love our neighbor as ourself. We have to have each other's back, to give each other the benefit of the doubt, and never get to a point where we are doing seemingly small things that can grow into huge things and cause so much damage. I mean, it is really crazy. Like I said, looking back through history at what seemingly small things happened that created huge wars and just horrible things, and they could have easily been stopped if people had taken a second to say, "Wait a second, I need to protect my brother. I don't need to think evil of him," and follow. Matthew 18 lays out what to do if there's an offense or if something happens. You go to your brother, talk to him immediately, and try to work things out, and not try to escalate things, make things bigger than they really are. So that's what I want to encourage you guys with today, is to be intentional about relationships, talking through things with your brothers and sisters. Recognize that we are our brother's keeper, even if we don't feel like it, even if we have a hard time giving the benefit of the doubt. We need to be very careful with our words and our actions, and always, always, always be our brother's keeper and be protecting towards them. Thank you guys so much for listening, and Shabbat Shalom from the beautiful, exceedingly good land of Israel.